Test, test. Test. Test one. Test one. Test, test. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MCMA's February webinar. Today's webinar will be hosted by Dr. Augustine Fou, and our topic this week, or this month, excuse me, is going to be how to save digital advertising ad fraud. I'm your host here, Tim Berry, with the MCMA. If you have any questions, technical issues throughout the webinar, go ahead and raise your hand or drop us a question in the right-hand column of your dashboard. We'll be here in about 10 minutes. We're going to get everything started. Once again, thank you for joining us for MCMA's February webinar, How to Save Digital Advertising Ad Fraud. Thanks so much, and we'll get started here in about 10 minutes. Good afternoon and welcome to the MCMA's February webinar, How to Save Digital Advertising. I'm your host, Tim Berry with the MCMA. Today we have Dr. Augustine Fou as our webinar overview. So today what we're going to do is we're going to get started here in about 5 minutes. If you have any issues with audio or slides or anything like that, go ahead and drop us a question on the right-hand side in your dashboard or go ahead and raise your hand. Once again, thank you very much for attending MCMA's February webinar, How to Save Digital Advertising. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just about 5 minutes. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to February's webinar. I'm Tim with the MCMA, here with Dr. Augustine Fou today. Our webinar today is How to Save Digital Advertising. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. What we're going to do is we're going to go over a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and drop those in the dashboard where the questions tab is, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. If you have any audio issues, if you're not seeing the slides, anything like that, just reach out and let me know so that way we can get that fixed. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. The MCMA website is such a great tool for all of our members and non-members with upcoming events and different sponsors and membership. And we just want to make sure that everybody is checking out that website every day and letting us know if there's anything we can do to help our members with the website. So just make sure to check out that website. And we thank you guys so much for being members of the MCMA. Also, we cannot do this without our sponsors. So thank you so much to our sponsors. Once again, without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you so much to our sponsors. We really appreciate all that you do for the MCMA. We have upcoming events. March 21st, we'll have our monthly educational luncheon, and that's going to be at the Princeton Club. Once again, that is March 21st. March 18th, we will have our April educational luncheon, and that topic is to be announced, and that will also be at the Princeton Club. And in May, it is MCMA Day on May 16th. What a big day for the MCMA. We hope that everybody can join us on MCMA Day. Last year was wonderful. So much going on MCMA Day. Hopefully you'll come check that out. Once again, that is on May 16th. Go ahead to that website and check it out with all of our upcoming events. Once again, if you have any technical issues or if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those down in the questions dashboard on the right-hand side, and we will be happy to help you guys out during the webinar today. So thanks so much. Our presenter today is Dr. Augustine Fou, and we'll be talking about saving digital advertising, ad fraud. So we're going to get started here in just a second. I'm going to pass the controls over to Dr. Augustine Fou here in just a second. Once again, any Q&As, drop those in the questions dashboard off to the right-hand side. And like always, we cannot do this without our sponsors. So we really appreciate all of our sponsors. We cannot do it without you. So thanks so much. All right, and we're going to get started here with Dr. Augustine Fou. So whenever you're ready, we'll pass it over to Dr. Augustine Fou. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim. I'm ready. Okay, let me share my screen.
All right.
All right, can you see the screen okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks so much.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me today. I'm very happy to share some of my research with you and the MCMA. Let me give you a bit of context about my background first, and I'll dive right into the presentation. So over the years, I've been in digital marketing here in New York City for going on 23 years. I left McKinsey in 95, 96 timeframe and got into the trenches of digital, kind of New York Silicon Alley here, and have witnessed the entire arc of the evolution of digital marketing. And in recent years, as you all know, we've now have much more technology collectively known as programmatic ad tech, right? So we're automating a lot of the processes that we need to do to get ads online and on different websites. And with the rise of programmatic, we also saw the rise of ad fraud. So in about 2012, when I left the big agency, when I left Omnicom and got back to my consulting practice, I started asking around for data, right, and analytics. And what I got back was, just the number, like, it's this percent fraud or that percent fraud, but without a lot of supporting details. So it was right at that time that I started building the technology. And some of the charts that you're going to see in this deck are based on firsthand, directly measured data using my technology. What I'm hoping to do today is to talk to the publishers in the room and really, first of all, explain what ad fraud is and how it affects them. But also, there's some optimistic signs this year that both publishers and marketers are taking steps to help mitigate it. So I think that I can see light at the end of the tunnel in terms of us at least winning some of the money back from being stolen out of the ecosystem. So that's why I think the good publishers will play a very key role in helping to solve digital ad fraud for the entire ad ecosystem. So that's kind of the positive message. But let me start with some background. So first, an obvious question is, why should publishers even care? So over the years, in talking to a lot of publishers, there's a couple of things that hit all of the good publishers. So for example, let me start with 3 questions. And from your own experience, see if you've come across this, right? So first one would be lower CPMs and downward pricing pressure. I'm sure a lot of the good publishers in the room would have seen that happen over the years. The second would be lower overall ad dollars. So it appears as if the budgets are shrinking because more and more of the buyers are starting to take those budgets that formerly went to the publishers in the room, and they're starting to take that and spend it in programmatic channels. So there's lower overall ad dollars or ad budget left over for good publishers. And finally, among the B2B publishers and some of the medical publishers that I work with, they're getting more refund requests or make good requests. So, this is, I don't have the feedback from the audience, but, if you think about your own experiences, if you've come across one or more of these, then you're affected by ad fraud. So now let me put a little more context and sizing around this. So we talk about digital ad spend, and based on the full year 2016 numbers that the IAB published, it's about 83 billion in total digital spend. And that 83 is broken up into 3 kinds. So you see the search spend on the left-hand side in dark blue, and you see the display ad spend on the right-hand side in the light green. And then there's 3 billion of other. Now, out of these, the search spend and the display spend, you'll see that Google takes up the majority of the search spend. That's the yellow. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see that Facebook plus Google display, again, takes up majority of the display spend. So after Google and Facebook, so we're outside of these 2 behemoths in the industry, there's about $29 billion left over out of the 83. That's being spent outside of Facebook and Google, and that's the pool that collectively the publishers in the room today, as well as the bad guys, are drawing from. So you'll see that I have that divided out. On the left-hand side, we have the good publishers, and I'll kind of explain that chart a little bit later on in the deck, but you'll see a lot of blue, and blue is a good thing, right? Blue means humans. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a lot of red. And I don't even call those publishers. I call those sites that carry ads, because very often these could be fake sites, outright fraudulent sites that don't even make an effort in creating content to attract human audiences. So they have few humans that go there or no humans that go there. And because they use unscrupulous practices like buying traffic, their cost of production is very low, so they can also sell the ad impressions or ad inventory at very low CPMs. So taking this as kind of the overview, you see that only about 1/3 of the dollars spent outside of Google and Facebook are going to good publishers. And according to my estimates and some of the estimates of other researchers, 2/3 of the dollars are now being siphoned out of the ecosystem. Right, so these are ad dollars or ad budget that should have gone to good publishers like the ones in the room, but that's now actually being diverted away to the bad guys, right, straight into their pockets. So, this being the overview, let me now give you some more data to support it, right? So why are the bad guys participating in ad fraud or committing ad fraud? Well, it's very simple to do. It's very low risk, and it's extremely profitable. So if they were to spend effort or make an effort to commit certain kinds of crime, they would obviously want to focus on the ones that are the most lucrative and the least risky, right? So in this case, this is a simple illustration of how ad fraud works. So the bad guys set up fake websites, and you can see they stick a ton of ads on there. Then they buy fake traffic, which causes the web pages to load and therefore the ad impressions to load, right? So they have to generate a lot of ad impressions. And then they sell those fake ad impressions in ad exchanges through programmatic channels, right? So if you look at some of these examples on the right-hand side, you'll see that these are non-trivial quantities. These are massive quantities, like 900 million impressions per day, right? And these are from apps that you've never heard of. So humans don't use these. Humans have never heard of these, but yet they're generating 900 million ad impressions a day. And that's just one app. You can see some of the other ones below it are also in the 900 million impressions per day range, right? So these are really, truly massive quantities. And these are kind of back of the envelope estimates, but if you look at the total number of domains that are registered, according to VeriSign at the end of 2016, there's 329 million domain names registered. But if you think about your own experience, how many sites or how many domains do you actually go to? So if we just take a back of the envelope calculation and say the top million sites are the ones that humans go to, like Wall Street Journal, Economist, ESPN, those are the ones that humans have heard of and go to. What are the other 328 million sites, right? So if you assume that only half of them carry ads, like about 160 million more, those are the sites that if you look at some of the domain names on the bottom right, you'll see these are entirely fake domains, right? These are created solely for the purpose of carrying ads, right? So now you can see there's 160 times more sites that are designed solely to carry ads, not to generate good content for humans to read and attract a human audience, right? So this is what you are competing against. And then on top of that, you can think about the mobile side, right? So as more and more dollars pour into mobile marketing, there are mobile apps that are designed to run ads, right? So if you look at some of the names of these apps on the right-hand side, you'll be very clear that they're not real. So again, if you look at the entire universe of apps, there's 7 million apps, and there's only a small handful that humans know about or have ever heard about, right? So again, in this case, you can see this estimate of 700 times more apps that are designed to steal ad dollars. Okay, so these are broad level estimates. But let me show you some data that has been collected over the years to show you how large the fraud problem is. So in 2015, AppNexus came out and did a huge cleanup. So they reduced their ad impression inventory by 92%, right? We're not talking 9% or 19%. We're talking 92%. They reduced their impression volume from 260 billion ad impressions to 20 billion. And they also raised prices, so don't feel too sorry for them. But in this case, if you can just, it's even hard to fathom the fact that you can reduce ad impression inventory by 92%. So basically, the question becomes, what were those marketers buying before they did the cleanup, right? In the next example, you might have heard of this example from 2016. This was the MethBot botnet that White Ops discovered and published about. So basically, one botnet was created out of millions of devices, and it was designed to steal video ad inventory, right? Steal dollars that were going towards video advertising. So this one botnet was able to steal 15% of the video ad inventory. And if you annualize the amount of damage they do to the ecosystem, that amounts to about an estimated $2 billion of ad revenue being stolen by this one botnet. Okay, so more and more examples over the years. So in 2017, we saw the Judy malware. So this was bad apps that were loaded on fake mobile devices, and collectively, that botnet can generate 1 billion ad impressions per minute. And there was an even larger one later in the year called Fireball. So all of these are being discovered by malware researchers, antivirus software companies, and things like that, just to show you the size and the magnitude of the fraud problem. And here's another example in mobile, when there are fake mobile devices downloading and installing apps, you can see these mobile app installs are also fake. So from Tune, the analytics company, they were able to show that of the many mobile networks and mobile exchanges that they studied, you can see that the top 8 of them were 100% fraud. And then the next 34 of them were all greater than 50% fraud. So again, this is just to show you the size of the problem. And one final one that was discovered at the end of last year is basically these traffic sellers that use page redirects to generate the traffic. So instead of just using a bot to load a web page to cause an ad impression to load, we're now seeing that the pages themselves can just keep auto reloading and redirecting to another page and redirecting to another page. And in doing so, generate more and more page views for the sole purpose of generating ad impressions. Okay, so in this case, what they're doing, what the bad guys are doing is what they call ARB, right? Simple arbitrage. So they can buy the traffic for low CPMs, like $1 CPMs, and they know they can sell ads for $5 to $10 CPMs. So pretty much, as long as they keep buying the traffic, they know they can turn a profit. Right, and so you can see on the right-hand side some of the ad networks that are used to sell this impression inventory, and you can see some of the big-name marketers that are being duped by these fraudulent websites. All right, and then if you take a close look at this example, you'll see some of these domain names are just alphanumeric strings. It's complete nonsense, right? No human would ever type those in or would ever accidentally go to those websites, but yet they exist for the purpose of ad fraud. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the fake app names as well. So it's literally like they just put in some letters and numbers, and that makes the app. Okay. So all that being said, current fraud detection technologies or verification companies cannot catch this. They cannot detect it. And one great example of this, meaning the fraud still slipping through, started at the end of last year and continues into this year. So I don't know how many of the publishers in the audience today have experienced this, but what I'm showing here is the malvertising campaign that started in Q4 of 2017 that is still going on right now. So what's happening is that when you go to a legitimate website, right? This happened to me over Christmas break. I was on tvguide.com, and then all of a sudden, my browser on my mobile device redirected to a page that said my system is heavily damaged by some virus, and I have to click here right now to repair it. So what's happening there is a malicious ad that got served into a publisher site, in this case tvguide.com. Once that ad got served into the ad slot, the JavaScript in the ad basically took over the page and redirected the user off to a malware site. So this was happening to a lot of my publishers, mainstream publishers, B2B publishers, medical publishers, and things like that. As long as they had programmatic ad slots on the page, they were vulnerable to this kind of malvertising attack, where the ads themselves break out of the ad slot and take over the page. So this is still going on. Some of you might have experienced this, and I can tell you in talking to a number of publishers, even very large mainstream publishers are experiencing that. So that's just one example of where the fraud detection cannot catch and prevent this kind of malvertising. And there are other examples. I won't go into too much detail here. I'll use some other examples later to illustrate. But what you can see here on the slide is that the bad guys have technology tools to help them trick measurement and trick reporting. So the bad guys can now show 100% viewability, but it's not because they actually have 100% viewability. It's because they tricked the measurement. So it's fake 100% viewability. They can also show that there's 0% NHT or non-human traffic. But again, it's not because there's no bots there or no NHT. It's because they tricked the measurement. And so what you see on the bottom here in the middle is that there are traffic sellers that are openly selling compliant traffic, which means it passes the IAS filters, it passes the forensic filters, it passes the moat filters, and all gets marked as clean. Again, not because it's real humans, it's because the bad guys' technology can trick the detection and make it look like it's legitimate. Okay, so the bad guys are still able to sell their inventory because they are able to trick measurement and reporting. And then here's an important one that will play into the concept of domain spoofing and how that impacts good publishers like yourselves. So in this case, the fraud filters actually don't work. And there's a very simple reason behind this. If there's a fake site like fakesite123.com, if they put that domain into the bid request, no one would ever bid on that, right? It's obvious it's a fake site. So these fake sites have to pretend to be a good site. So in this case, ft.com, and then I'll have the example later that was written up. But fake site 123.com has to pretend to be ft.com. So they declare that in the bid request so that they can actually get bids. But if they actually put in ft.com, that legitimate domain is not on any blacklist, so it passes the blacklist checks. It is on a whole bunch of marketers' whitelists, so again, it gets past that. And so that's what I mean by the pre-bid filters don't work, because the domains that the bad sites have to use are all declared. They just say it's ft.com. And then furthermore, again, when we get into the reporting afterwards, the post-campaign reporting also fails because they show declared domains, right? So again, in those placement reports, it's going to say ft.com, and that looks perfectly legitimate, right? So, basically, because the current fraud detection cannot catch it, we see examples like this, right? So this was a piece that was written up based on research done very recently. And you can see that the publisher of Newsweek and IB Times had basically been buying traffic. And all the while, all that traffic and the ad impressions looked clean and verified. But yet, it was still fake traffic because it was generated via pop-ups or pop-unders on unsavory websites. So again, just the fact that it's a big name publisher doesn't mean that they're not committing ad fraud. And in fact, they're using technology tools. They're buying traffic from traffic sellers that can get by the fraud detection. So with all of this fraud going on, let me now get to the heart of the matter and talk about how good publishers continue to be harmed by this. Right, so you saw the different concerns at the very beginning of lower CPMs, lower ad budgets left over for good publishers, and finally accusations of fraud. Let me show you how that happens. Okay, so the first example is the fake inventory, right? You might have heard the term spoofed domains, and that is the example that we showed a few slides ago where fakesite123.com pretends to be a legitimate site like ft.com. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm using an example from one of my medical publishers, right? Call it Publisher A. The fake sites are pretending to be this medical publisher in order to sell very high CPM inventory to pharma companies and other marketers that want to buy that inventory. And then you'll notice the snapshot of the available inventory on open exchanges, pretending to be Publisher A. The reason I say it's pretending to be, it's because Publisher A doesn't sell, this medical publisher doesn't sell any inventory on any open exchange. So all of this inventory is basically coming from fake sites pretending to be this good medical publisher, right? And so this is the problem with spoof domains. And so when the buyers think they're buying Publisher A, right, they think they're buying this medical publisher, in fact, they are not. In fact, they are buying low-cost inventory from a fake site pretending to be Publisher A. So there's a way to deal with this, and that's to use the ads.txt initiative that the IAB and the IAB Tech Lab has put out. So some of that's being adopted right now, and I'll get into some more details of how that's going to help a good publisher like the ones in the room today. So this was the example that was written up at the end of last year. The FT, so FT.com, basically found a large number of sites spoofing their inventory, right? And these fake sites were selling that fake inventory through 6 large exchanges. Right? And so when a marketer buys FT.com inventory on open exchanges, they're not sure if it's the real FT.com or if it's a fake site pretending to be FT.com, right? So again, this is something that we can actually see in the data, and FT.com did their own research and was able to show and shut down all those fake sites that were selling inventory pretending to be their quality inventory. Now, the problem with that is when the buyers buy this fake stuff and they think it's from FT.com and they measure it for ad fraud or bots, they're going to see a ton of bots because it's not FT.com. It's actually they're measuring the fake stuff. So of course they're going to see a lot of fraud. So in that case, when they detect the fraud, they're going to call up the real FT.com and accuse them of fraud. So again, I've seen that happen to a lot of the medical publishers and B2B publishers that I serve. They get these refund requests, they get make good requests coming in from the buyer saying, oh, well, we see 90% fraud on your site. But there isn't 90% fraud on their site. It's actually the measurements being done of fake inventory and not on the real FT.com. Right? So good publishers are still being wrongly accused of fraud. And on top of that, there's errors in measurement. So in this case, what I'm showing here is that incorrect IVT measurement may also be a cause of those false accusations, right? So in this case, we were able to measure on the site, and you can see sources 1 and 2 in the blue and the orange. Those two corroborate that there's very low IVT or invalid traffic on this website. Whereas source 3, you can see that gray line is jumping all over the place. And that's due to many different factors, but as an example, they're sampling, right? So they're taking 1 out of every 1,000 data points and then extrapolating. And they're also not measuring directly on the page. So that's why that measurement is jumping all over the place. So in this case, if you look at some of the peaks, they'll come back and say, oh, well, we found 50% fraud on your site or IVT on your site. We want a refund. Right. So again, in addition to the fraud measurements being done on fake sites, so that's not even the real publisher to begin with, there's this problem of incorrect IVT measurements, both of which are now causing good publishers to be wrongly accused of fraud. Right. So that's part of the problem that good publishers face. And then when publishers are selling on open exchanges, let's take this one example of the data from the AEMI. You can see for every dollar that the advertiser spends, you can see that less than 30 cents of it makes it through to the publisher. And that's because there are a lot of different players in the middle, in that supply chain, that are taking their own tolls, if you will. Right, so they have to maximize their own profit. They have to take a toll. They have to get paid for their services and their technology. And so when all is said and done, 61% of the dollar is being eaten up or absorbed by the middlemen in the supply chain. So the publisher ends up with a very small amount of that initial dollar that the advertiser spent. So the reason I'm showing this slide is to show to publishers that sometimes if you think selling your unsold inventory in exchanges might be a good idea just to make a little extra dollars from it. In this case, not only does it introduce all these other problems that come with selling through programmatic, you'll see that even if they're able to successfully sell, they're only getting about 30 cents on the dollar that the advertiser is spending. So again, it's a very small amount, and typically, now that I've talked to some publishers that have tried programmatic, it doesn't amount to any substantial additional revenue for them. So then the question becomes, is it worth the risk of selling on open exchanges? Now, let me give you a very specific example here where a publisher like Journal of Clinical Oncology will have a very highly specialized audience, the oncologists that go to the site on a regular basis, right? So they have a highly specialized, dedicated audience of oncologists that go to the site. But the way the fraudsters are taking advantage of this is through the concept of retargeting. So what the bad guys do is they will have one of their bots visit a site like Journal of Clinical Oncology to pretend to be an oncologist, right? Because we think that people who visit the site are real oncologists. But when the bot visits the site first and then goes elsewhere, the concept of retargeting, right? So when they do cookie matching and say, oh, well, this cookie visited JCO before, and now they're showing up on this other programmatic exchange. Let's retarget that user with an oncology ad, right? So the ad tech platforms assume that that's an oncologist because they simply visited JCO. But unfortunately, it's not. It's actually a bot that did that specifically to trick the ad tech systems to retarget them. So now when this bot goes to one of these fake sites and they cause the ad impression to load, basically the marketer is targeting a bot that is pretending to be an oncologist. So what they're doing here is they're basically stealing away a dedicated, highly specialized audience from this site, JCO, this journal site, this medical publisher that has this specialized audience. And now when ad tech or the marketers can show ads to these users outside of JCO or somewhere else in the ad tech ecosystem, then the marketers no longer need to buy ads from JCO in order to show ads to the specialized audience. So hopefully this illustrates an example of how specialized audiences can be stolen away from dedicated high quality publishers, and it causes ad impressions to load elsewhere. So that's how those sites are able to steal the ad revenue. All right, and one final topic that publishers need to be aware of is the concept of privacy violations, right? So over the years, publishers have added more and more tracking pixels or third-party analytics tags or other forms of tracking onto their site. However, as some of these publishers have so many different kinds of third-party tracking pixels on their site, they lose track of what is being measured or collected of their audiences. So in this case, this was a Princeton research team that showed that a bunch of these tracking pixels were actually exfiltrating personal data from the users of these publishers. Right, so they're basically collecting data. In this case, they're looking at people typing, people moving their mouse up and down the page and things like that. And all of that data is being collected and sent to a third-party server. So the question becomes, what liability do the good publishers have when they allow third-party tracking pixels to collect data of their audience without consent and basically exfiltrate that data to third-party servers? So the question is whether the publishers have liability under the GDPR that's coming up this year. So these are things that publishers should be aware of. So all that being said, now let me close the loop and say how good publishers are being affected by the fraud. I think good publishers should be freaking mad about this because lower CPMs are caused by fake sites selling cheap inventory. So when here are some fake sites selling 30-cent CPM inventory, it's very hard for a legitimate publisher to continue to charge $35 CPMs, right? Because the buyers are going to be attracted by the lower cost, cheap inventory. So of course there's downward pressure, pricing pressure on good publishers' CPMs. The second is lower ad dollars, right? So now as more and more of this ad budget gets funneled to programmatic exchanges and away from good publishers, that's what you see in the form of lower ad budgets coming your way. Right, so there's lower overall dollars available to good publishers. And then finally, the third point about refund requests or make good requests. Basically, the buyers think they bought ft.com or they think they bought your inventory, but unfortunately it wasn't. So it was fake site 123.com pretending to be your inventory. So of course, when they detect for fraud, they're going to find the fraud, and then they're going to call up the real publisher and accuse them of fraud and ask for the refund, right? So let me pause here. I see a few questions coming through on chat. There's basically a couple of different types of selling, right? Open RTB, open real-time bidding. There's private marketplaces and automated guarantees. I don't think I'm going to get too deep into that, but let me differentiate two main types. One is direct, right, where the buyer buys direct from the publisher. That's going to be the least at risk of ad fraud, because they know when they give the dollar to the good publisher and they give the ad creative to the publisher, they will actually run the ads on the sites. What is more risky is if you try to buy cheap inventory through programmatic exchanges, because if you remember from some of the slides I showed before, that inventory may not actually be ft.com. It may be fake site123.com pretending to be ft.com, right? So first of all, you don't know what you're getting. And second, there's a reason why all that inventory is so cheap, right? It's because it's generated by fake sites. But if anyone wants to delve deeper into this topic of different forms of selling, we can take that offline later. Another question is, what does IVT mean? So IVT means invalid traffic. To me, that's kind of a euphemism, right? It's a bot, just call it a bot. It's not real humans hitting a web page, so it's fake, right? There's another acronym called NHT, so non-human traffic. It's basically the same thing, right? It's bots, it's not humans. So just call it what it is. It's fake traffic. And then finally, there's a question about fake mobile devices. So I mentioned earlier, as we move into the mobile world, there are actual software packages that are mobile simulators, right? So mobile app developers use these simulators to pretend to be a device so that they can download and load their app, and then they can basically test different aspects of their app, right, automatically. So these mobile simulators are now being used to download apps and then basically open them every morning, use them, so on and so forth. So these fake mobile devices are basically software programs that simply run in a data center. And their job is to download an app, hit a web page, or do whatever the fraudsters need them to do in order to generate ad revenue from the fake ad impressions. Okay. So if there are any other questions, be sure to type that in chat, and Tim will bubble those up to me, and then I can try to answer that. Now, before we go on to the next section of what good publishers are doing and what good marketers are doing, let me address this concept, right? Programmatic versus programmatic. So at a very recent publisher conference, I was hearing people saying, oh, well, we have to sell through programmatic because, everyone wants the targeting, everyone wants the placement and all that kind of stuff. So that is true. And so the way I'll differentiate this is programmatic exchanges versus programmatic ad tech. So the technology is necessary because now, you can't manually place millions upon millions of ad impressions, right? You still have to use programmatic ad tech to place the ads. So good publishers have the programmatic ad tech to show the ad impressions. That's different from selling through programmatic ad exchanges, right? So for all the different problems and the risks that I talked about earlier in this webinar, selling through programmatic exchanges exposes the publisher and the marketers to much higher risk of fraud, right? For all of those examples that I said before. So the difference is premium publishers or good publishers can still use programmatic ad tech to place the ads. That's very different than selling your inventory through programmatic exchanges. So that's what I mean by programmatic versus programmatic, because I think a lot of publishers still assume that they had to sell their inventory through programmatic exchanges in order to use programmatic ad tech. Okay. So that being said, let me get on to the good news part of the presentation. And this is where good publishers are now taking control. So as of the end of last year and into this year, I'm seeing publishers take actions that are helping to reduce the fraud and clean up the ecosystem. So let me show you one example here. So good publishers are protecting their buyers by reducing the amount of bots coming to their site. So they do that in two ways. First is they stop buying traffic. So if you remember the Newsweek example, they were buying a lot of traffic, and those are not humans. Those are bots and other forms of fraud causing the ad impressions. So that's actually ripping off the buyers. So publisher one stopped buying traffic because they realized that wasn't a good thing to do. So they stopped it. The second is the publisher number two filtered data center traffic. So again, humans don't access the internet through data centers. So when you see a hit from a data center, it's probably not a human, it's probably a bot. So when they started filtering this, again, they're doing that. That step is going to help them protect their buyers from being exposed to bots and non-human traffic. Another thing that good publishers are doing is they're reducing or minimizing the third-party trackers that they put on their site over the years. So again, take this example, right? This one publisher had 42 trackers on their site, and then they reduced it all the way down to 8. Now, not only is that going to help protect the users from being tracked and their private information getting exfiltrated, it's also going to have major benefits in terms of the page loading time, right? So it reduced it from 24-second load time to 1 second. So there's a lot of other benefits to the publishers for taking these steps. And then furthermore, the good publishers are the ones that have good practices. So what do I mean by good business practices? On the left-hand side, you'll see good publishers. They don't source traffic. They take steps to protect their advertisers. They take steps to protect their consumers. Whereas on the right-hand side, again, these sites that carry ads, they do everything they can to increase their own ad revenue, whether it's scrupulous or not. So they do, they buy the traffic, they do audience extension, they auto refresh the pages, they auto refresh the ad impressions, so on and so forth. So this is what I mean by good publishers have good business practices. And then you heard me mention ads.txt. So it's a very simple thing. It's just a text file that publishers can put on their root directory, right? And all that text file says is here's a list of the ad exchanges that are authorized to sell my inventory. So the reason this is important for publishers to have as soon as possible is so that when the buyers come to look, they will now know, oh, well, if I bought it from ad exchange BCD and it's not listed here, then I know I bought fake inventory because that ad exchange is not authorized to sell inventory from this particular publisher. So this is a step that publishers can do to just make it easier for the buyers to tell if they're buying real inventory, meaning your inventory, or they're buying fake inventory pretending to be your sites. All right. And so the publishers are also starting to run their own experiments. And so again, this reinforces a slide that I said earlier where when the publishers ran their own experiments and just bought their own inventory on programmatic exchanges, you can see how little actually gets through to them. So The Guardian ran that experiment in 2016, and for every pound that they spent, they only got 30 pence back. And Business Insider ran this experiment with $40,000 of their own money. They bought BusinessInsider.com on open exchanges, but at the end of everything, they only saw $97 come all the way through to them. So these are experiments that other publishers have already run. You can run your own. The bottom line is a lot of the dollars get siphoned away and absorbed by all the people or other parties in the supply chain. So imagine a world where the marketer spent the money and it goes direct to the publisher. Now, again, it can be directly purchased from the publisher, but still be placed programmatically using programmatic technology. But in this case, the buyers know that they're buying from the good publisher because they paid them directly and gave them the ad creatives to run. And so when they're buying from a good publisher, they know they have good human audiences. So now let me talk a little bit about the marketers. So these are the marketers that place ads on different websites. So if you understand what they're looking for and what experiments they're running, you know how to better serve them. So you've heard of these experiments over the years. So last year, Chase ran their own experiment by cutting the number of sites which showed their ad from 400,000 sites to just 5,000. That's a 99% reduction in reach, but they saw no deterioration in their performance metrics. That means most of that reach was not necessarily shown to human audiences, right? So in this case, by cutting all that out, there was no negative impact on their performance. P&G also ran their own experiment where they cut $140 million in digital spend in a quarter and showed that there was no impact on sales. In fact, sales went up. So bottom line is the entire 140 million spent in digital, and this is a tiny drop in their overall budget, had no impact on their sales. So they could cut all that out and they could continue cutting. And then Restoration Hardware also did their own experiment, and this had to do with the search ads or paid search ads that they were buying when all that traffic would have come to them anyway. So long story short, the marketers are starting to realize that what's important is the human audiences that the ads are shown to, not the number of ads being shown. So in this case, when we look at 5 different paid display sources, right, again, starting to use some of our technology here, you'll see that source 1 has a lot of dark blue and very little dark red, whereas source 5 is kind of the opposite. It has very little dark blue and more red and other unknown stuff, which is the white and the gray. But if you take into account the fact that you're showing ads to far fewer humans, if ultimately you care about ads being shown to real humans who can then turn into your customers, right? They're actually paying a much higher cost per human, because even if source 5 costs less in terms of CPM, it's still going to cost more on a cost per human basis. So more and more marketers are starting to realize that it's not about the quantity of ad impressions that they buy, it's whether the ads were shown to humans. And good publishers have real human audiences, right? That because they have real content that they want to read. And let me show you one other example where the marketer now can show direct correlation between human audiences and conversion events. So here we're using an example of phone calls, right? So this is for a medical device clients advertising on pharma or medical websites, medical publishers. When we look at the number of visits, right, out of 47,000 visits, if we take roughly 60% is dark blue, that's 30,000 humans. And those 30,000 humans led to 1,000 phone calls of people who are actually interested. If you look at paid source 2, we have fewer visits, but we also have fewer humans. So in this case, there's 3,000 humans, so about a tenth of the line above it. You'll see that it drove 100 calls. So in this case, you can see a direct straight line correlation between the number of humans that actually arrived at the site and the ones that actually made the phone call, which in this case is a proxy for a conversion event. So the amount of humans, not the number of visits, is what matters here. So in this case, again, these are things that marketers are starting to do for themselves to determine where they're going to allocate their budget. So now let me, again, zoom out a little bit and put this in context. So you'll see here a contrast between a good publisher, A, where you see a lot of humans, right, a lot of dark blue, good human audience, very little red. You'll see that it drives more arrivals, click-throughs to the marketer's landing page and more conversions, compared to the set on the bottom, which is B. It's an example from an open exchange. Now, of course, there's still some humans there. You still see some dark blue, but you'll see a lot less of that. And you see a lot more dark red and a lot more other stuff like the white in the middle, right? Those are things that we can't measure. If you start with lower cost media and lower quality media, you're going to get fewer arrivals, right? And that's the middle of the bottom. And then of those people, of those arrivals, you're going to get a far smaller number of people who actually convert. So in this case, contrasting A versus B, you can see that A, the good publisher, drives 30 times more human conversion event than when a marketer buys on open exchanges. So that being said, the final question is, how do we differentiate good publishers from everybody else? Right? So if you recall, I said earlier, good publishers have good business practices. And that's the key. That's the moral of the story here. It's not about technology. It's not about fraud detection tech. And it's not about measurement. It's really about whether the good publishers have good business practices. And one of the things, you might have heard of this organization called Alliance for Audited Media, or AAM. Basically, they've developed a process called quality certification. And even though it does use technology to do verification and validation, the most important part of the quality certification process is a business process review, which means we ask the publishers about their business practices. Do they buy traffic? Do they do audience extension? Do they do all these other things that would expose them to higher risk of ad fraud? And so in this case, by going through a quality certification process, it's an example of how we can now start to tell apart good publishers from all those other sites that carry ads. So again, for the publishers in the room, just one more slide to wrap up. It might be a good idea to do some measurement. So again, I'm a researcher, so I'm not a fraud detection technology company. But again, over the years, I've built the tech to help publishers measure the quality of the traffic coming to their site. If we are able to do the measurement, then with this input data, we can actually go on to certification, and then ultimately we can do ROI research, which basically means, just like some of the slides a few slides ago, we can actually show to the marketers or the buyers that more humans, meaning a better human audience, translates into better business outcomes. So basically, this is what I mean, when we started out the webinar saying this is how good publishers can help save digital marketing, right? As long as there's fraud and as long as there's all these fake sites out there selling fake inventory, buyers are going to become more and more wary of digital marketing and start taking their dollars away, right? So I've already seen some big marketers shift their dollars back to TV, back to print, back to other non-digital channels. But if the good publishers can now demonstrate to marketers, it's basically you ain't seen nothing yet, right? All the stuff that you've been doing in digital has thus far been affected by ad fraud. If the marketers can now buy direct from good publishers that have good business practices and have good human audiences, they will now start to see the true value of digital. And that's what I mean by good publishers will be able to help us save all of digital marketing. Thank you very much. Let me turn this back to Tim and open up the floor to questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Fu. What a great and insightful webinar here today. We do have a couple questions. Also, if you have questions, go ahead and send those over. We do have a couple minutes, and I'll send those over to Dr. Fu. Thanks so much.
Okay. Great. I'll repeat the question as you type it in here. What are my thoughts about the other trade organizations like the IAB and TAG and all those? I think those are all great organizations, and in fact, by helping to set standards, right? So the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, is helping to set standards around bots and IVT. They're also helping to set standards around viewability. All of those are basically essential to have, right? If we don't have any standards, we don't know what we're measuring and what's good and what's bad, right? So we have to have standards. So they're a standard setting body. So at a baseline, we need that. TAG is also now doing certification, meaning they have to accredit some of the ad tech companies and some of the publishers and the other players. All of those are also good because it helps increase transparency. So you might have heard the term transparency or the lack thereof. So again, sometimes if you don't know who you're paying or where your money is going to, that's very difficult. That's very hard to solve, right? So that's how the bad guys who operate in the shadows can continue to get away with, ripping off the ecosystem. And with TAG, as the publishers register, as the ad tech companies register and become part of that registry, at least you have some way of finding out who got paid, right? So all of those things are steps in the right direction to help, again, reduce the overall scourge of fraud. And then I mentioned the ads.txt initiative, right? That's another technology thing, right? It's a simple piece of technology, but the IAB Tech Lab helped to pioneer that and standardize it. And now more and more publishers are adding that. And again, that's a small step in the right direction. It's not going to solve all of fraud, but at least the publishers can now tell the buyers who are the exchanges that are authorized to sell their inventory. So that just makes it easier for the buyers to pick out, oh, well, these are exchanges that shouldn't be carrying this publisher's inventory. So again, all of those are steps in the right direction, and they are all helpful in reducing fraud. So the next question is about private exchanges and private marketplaces. Those are better in the sense that the marketers can now buy more directly from publishers. Now, as you can see from before, if you recall the Newsweek slide, right, just the fact that they're selling on exchanges, even if they're selling on private marketplaces, doesn't mean it's going to be clean and safe and fraud-free. It just means that you're buying in one place from a group of publishers. So it still boils down to whether the publishers themselves are good or not, right? Or whether the publishers themselves have real human audiences or not, right? So in the case of Newsweek and IB Times, because of their practice of going out to buy traffic, right? Even if they didn't intend to, just common sense will tell you, where the heck is all that traffic coming from, right? It's not like there's a whole bunch of humans sitting around with nothing to do but to go to your particular website, right? So basically, a lot of that traffic is literally created out of thin air using bots or other fraudulent means, even if they are able to trick all the detection technologies or the verification companies and appear to be clean. So again, it boils down to whether the publishers themselves are clean, not so much where you buy them. So whether you're buying the good publishers on an exchange or in a private marketplace, that's less important than whether the publishers themselves are clean and have good business practices. All right. So the next one is the Brave browser. I'm assuming this has something to do with ad blocking, right? So, and then you probably heard the news that Google is starting to block ads in Chrome itself, right? So I think a lot of publishers are up in arms about that. However, I would say it's not going to affect the good publishers in the audience today or the ones in the room of MCMA. It's because the Google Chrome ad blocking is to block the most egregious forms of bad ads, right? The ones that take over the page and don't let you close out of it. The ones that autoplay sounds or, and so on and so forth. So what they're doing is they're blocking the ads that violate privacy clauses or that are intrusive and that are unwanted and that are egregious. They're not blocking normal ads. So for the most part, the medical publishers and the B2B publishers that I work with, they don't have this problem because they're serving normal display ads, 300 by 250 on the page. They don't do anything else, right? So in that case, I think the good publishers shouldn't have too much to fear about ad blocking or Google Chrome blocking ads. The next question is talking about GDPR. So it's the General Data Protection Regulation coming over from the EU. And long story short, it really boils down to whether the consumers or the users, meaning the visitors to the websites, have given consent and affirmative consent to their data being collected and bought and sold and exchanged and things like that. So in most cases, again, as it crosses the ocean to the U.S., it remains to be seen how aggressive the enforcement of it will be and how the ad tech community has to kind of change their practices. So just as one example, a data management platform is now having to go back and collect consent from all the users whose data was being collected and being used for retargeting purposes. So those are some examples of how ad tech companies have to deal with that. But again, like I said in one of the slides earlier, the way it might impact some of the publishers here is that if they're allowing a lot of third-party tracking tags on their site and the publisher doesn't actually know what's being collected of their own users, that's not a good thing, right? So look into that, and ideally, if you're able to reduce some of the third-party tracking on your site, unless you know for sure that they're compliant, then the publishers in the room might also be putting themselves at risk of non-compliance because they are allowing all these third-party trackers on their site. So we're right at time. Tim, any other questions? Any last questions before we finish?
That looks like it's it. Thank you so much for such a great webinar. And once again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to the MCMA, and we'll make sure that those get directed to Dr. Fu. Once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate everybody coming out, and we cannot do this without our sponsors. So we really, really, really appreciate all of our sponsors, all of our members, and we can't do it without you. So thanks so much, and we will see you next month. And make sure to check out our spring event calendar that's listed on the MCMA website. So we have our next event will be March 21st, and then we'll have an event March 18th, the educational luncheon. And obviously the big day is May 16th. That's MCMA Day. So make sure you check out more information on that. And thank you so much for attending our February webinar. We'll see you next month. Thank you, Dr. Fu. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.